Before we get started with today's podcast episode, I just want to take a minute to tell you about a free masterclass for dance teachers that I have coming up soon. The NeuroFlex Masterclass, Identifying the Missing Link in Your Dancer's Flexibility, is happening Monday, August 19th at 10 a.m. Pacific. The nervous system is queen when it comes to the body. It controls our ability to see, think, feel, breathe, and move. This means that it also controls our flexibility and our mobility. Nervous system dysregulation is one of the biggest factors limiting dancers' mobility that most dance teachers miss. In this masterclass, you'll learn about the link between the nervous system and mobility and how to harness the power of the nervous system to improve your dancer's flexibility. I would love to have you join me on Monday, August 19th. So for more information and to save your free spot in the masterclass now, you can go to www.allegroperformance.com/masterclass. And now, here's today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erica Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I am really excited about today's episode because I have a guest on again today, and I'm really excited to introduce all of you guys to Maria. Maria Haralambis is a current PhD student. She's adjunct faculty, a social media manager, a pre-pro ballet teacher, and the CEO of The Dance Scientist. A lot of you might know her from The Dance Scientist through her social media accounts. You can see her featured in the Dance magazine in a section titled What Dancers Can Learn from Sports Performance Training. She serves 8 roles in boards and committees across organizations, including Healthy Dancer Canada, and we actually sit on a committee together right now through Healthy Dancer Canada, IADMS, and NDEO, among other organizations. As a pre-pro ballet teacher, her students have attended events including YAGP, the Cecchetti Intensive at Hope College, ABT Summer Intensive, Grand Rapids Ballet Intensive, and have won several awards and scholarships. And some of her dancers now dance professionally. She has all the certifications. So she holds certifications in Stott Pilates, Acrobatic Arts, Cecchetti, Rock Tape, and a NASM Corrective Exercise, First Aid, among others. For her Masters Thesis, she conducted her own research study in a motor learning lab that analyzed dancers' balance skills using a computerized forceplate known as the Balance Master. Maria has a wealth of teaching experience. She teaches at a dance studio. She teaches an online dance kinesiology course to MFA students at Reinhardt University, Georgia. She is a social media manager for several dance organizations, and she is a professor for continuing development course on NDEO's OPDI platform. And I'm sure we'll get into talking about that later on in the podcast. Outside of that, her own business, The Dance Scientist, offers products for dance educators such as anatomy posters, ebook teaching resources, online courses, and she also has her own podcast. So I'm so grateful for you taking the time to be on my podcast today, Maria. So welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. This is like a nerd conversation that I'm ready for.
I know, absolutely. I feel like we could probably talk for days on all of the nerdy things, but we will try and keep this concise and brief for the audience. But thanks so much for being here. I always start all my guest podcast episodes with asking everyone the same sort of general question, which is, what's sort of your earliest memories of dance, or like how did you get into dance or fall in love with dance?
I was drawn to dance because I was a little anxious as a child. And so ballet and, specifically ballet, I was drawn to it. It calmed me down with the structure, right? I like having the sense of routine, right? Because I could follow a combination and then it could kind of ease my anxiety and I could kind of focus on the combination, right? And I could focus on moving and how that felt in my body, right? And so then, one of the earliest memories that I have as a child is that I was a very, very, very curious dancer. I would be asking my teachers like deep anatomical questions at like
Yeah.
7. Like I would ask them like, why does my shoulder do this when I lift my arm into this position, right? And some of the questions couldn't really, some of it was kind of beyond their scope because dance science wasn't much of a thing. But one thing that I appreciated that they did was, how Dance Magazine will put out a lot of like, sports backed articles, PTs and stuff. Yeah. So they would bring in a lot of Dance Magazine articles and they'd be like, oh, I read about this the other day and maybe here's a tip that might help you. So, that was a way that they kind of like brought in a little bit of anatomy because they didn't really have an anatomy background. So, you can't really expect everyone to be reading research constantly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just remember being a very curious dancer and all of those questions, I was like, someday those questions are going to be answered. And so when I got my undergrad and took my first dance kinesiology class, I was like, oh, when the light bulbs go off and you start to realize that like, if I would have known these things when I was 7 or 8, just basic. I mean, I'm not talking like physiology. I'm not talking like biology, but I'm just talking like general information. My technique would have been better and I probably would have danced for longer.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you like as a child already like recognized that that's what you were interested in. And I feel like I was the same, although maybe not so much like from an anatomy perspective, but like a biomechanic perspective. And like it was maybe a little bit of like an obsession with technique maybe, but like I was so interested in like what is like the exact alignment this is supposed to be, like how does the knee line up with the foot? And so it was very much from like more of a biomechanical perspective, which obviously then led down a path to anatomy. But I don't think at the time when I was little I understood that it was like a link to anatomy. It was mostly just like it was probably like perfectionist tendencies, but like what is the like exact technique that this should be, which really translated into like biomechanics. So that's really interesting.
It was a feeling of like, I want to get this right,
Yeah, exactly.
Like, help me improve this,
Yeah. And for me, like all of the like kind of artistic cues and things weren't going to help me like get it right. It was like, I needed the like precise and anatomical, biomechanical, like that was how my brain was wired, that I was like, I want that detailed information to get it right. Don't give me all of the like, kind of more artistic cues. Not that there isn't a place for those, and absolutely some dancers need like more of those cues, but I definitely was more of the anatomy, biomechanics for sure.
Right. And so when I, when I took that dance kinesiology course, I was like, wow, if I would have had very basic information in my training, just blended a little more consistently, things would have been different for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious how you ended up in a dance kinesiology course. Like, how did you find out that that was like an option, or did you do your undergrad? Like, was it a BFA, or what led you down that path in terms of finding out that like, oh, I could actually go into the world of like dance research or like that side of things? Yeah,
I did my undergrad. I got a BS in dance, bachelor's in dance. Yeah. So we had to take dance kinesiology as a required class. Yeah.
And did you...
that really like opened my eyes to the world of dance science. Yeah.
Amazing. And did you find that program on your own, or was it your teachers growing up who kind of like pushed you in that direction because they knew how curious you had been as a like young dancer?
Nope. I just happened to go to Wayne State and it happened to be an amazing fit for me.
Amazing.
Yeah. Had an amazing professor teach my dance kinesiology class who's like ended up being a mentor for me for Pilates and stuff as well. And so it somehow just ended up working out perfectly.
That's awesome. I love stories like that. And it's like you go into something and you don't even really know that that's like the thing you want to go into. And then you're like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I'm meant to be doing. Yeah.
I mean, it's a close university to me. And I figured, okay, I'll start here and I'll just kind of see where things go, see where things end up. And it ended up being a great program. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. And then in terms of teaching, did you teach kind of like right out of like high school as well? Like, were you teaching at the same time you were going to university, or was it something that it was like once you kind of did the kinesiology and the dance kinesiology stuff that you were like, oh, now I want to go back and teach and apply this in the classroom?
Yeah. So actually, before I even graduated high school, my studio owner had me start working the desk. Yeah. So she would have the desk. Yeah. Because I love like desk stuff too.
Right.
I love like the secretary side of things too, like the business side of things too, like helping people check out, helping people register, helping, with social media things, websites.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can see that even in just like your own, like the dance scientist business, you can see that you like doing like the graphic design and the product of like development and all of that stuff.
In a weird way, it's like, it's therapeutic to me. I don't know. It's like a creative outlet,
Yeah,
just
for sure.
Yeah. So that's
cool.
One way that I started teaching at the studio that I grew up dancing at is where I currently teach.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. I love that. And so then kind of went down the path of dance kinesiology and science and research and all of that.
That would assess classes too. And then I started teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into sort of like your previous master's and then now sort of current PhD, like what the path to that was? Because some people, like absolutely are really into the science and into the research, but maybe after undergrad, they're like, do you know what? That's as far as I'm going to go. What was your journey like into further research?
Yeah, for me, many people don't know this, but I originally was a double major in dance and kinesiology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, up until close to the final point. And then one day in my head, I was like, it's probably not that much different if I compare it to just getting my master's in kinesiology. And it really wasn't that many more credits. So I'm like, I'm just going to do a master's instead. And it just took me like a year longer.
Okay.
It was a really great experience for me too, because I feel like now I can compare the two worlds, right? Like you learn so much about how athletes train and then you learn how dancers are trained and you just see how different they are and how much they can learn from each other, right? They don't have to be the exact same, but like there's things that they can learn,
Absolutely.
You see those two worlds and you're like, oh, that helped me be a better educator too, because now I'm more aware.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so for my thesis, you could either pick if you wanted to do a research study or if you wanted to do it like an internship. But we actually already had to do an internship for my undergrad dance major. So I picked to do a research study for my master's.
Okay.
Yeah. So I picked to do just an original research study.
Nice.
Yep. And a mobile learning lab.
And was that then what led you into doing your PhD? Okay, now that I've started this research, now I want to continue on.
I'm like, I don't want to stop reading. I don't want to stop reading research studies.
That's
like
awesome
thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that continuous, always wanting to learn more and strive for more. So what is your current PhD research area or your topic?
So my current PhD is going to be in health and human performance. It's an online program through Concordia University, Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah. So, all the classes are basically tailored towards athletes. So again, I'm still learning about like the general population, but it's fine because I can still tailor my projects towards dancers and my dissertation towards dancers. Mm-hmm. So I'm able to like mold and make my own like dance science PhD.
Yeah, that's awesome.
In the US right now.
Yeah. Well, I think I think that's a really common story for so many people in the dance world. And even like on the podcast, when I talk about like research or stats or things, when we're talking about specific injuries, there's always like, we only know this much about the dance population, but we know like this much about the sports population. And so we can like use that data. And I think sometimes in the dance world, there's like this desire for the dance. And I like, kind of the industry as a whole to be like, we're not sport, we're dance, we're different, we're special, we're, totally unique. And I agree in a lot of ways, like it is absolutely different because it's an art form and like all of that. But when it comes to some of this like dance science principles, like human anatomy and physiology and like biology is the same regardless of what activity you're doing. And yes, the applications might be different, but I think sometimes there's like this like feeling that we need to like start everything from scratch in the dance world, but really we can take so much from the sports world and then just like adapt it to the dance world. And so we don't have to start from scratch because we're already probably, 25 years behind sports, maybe even more than that now. And so instead of like starting where sports started, like 25 or 40 years ago, like we really can just like piggyback on so much of what they've learned and then apply it to dance and just make those tweaks that make it applicable to dancers because we are different.
Right. And like we said, they don't, our two worlds don't have to be the exact same,
No, absolutely not.
Side by side, they wouldn't look the same. They're not they're not the same in that regard, but they can learn from one another on how things get applied, right? And why things get applied.
Yeah. So from your like research, but also your own just like personal experience and teaching experience and things like that, do you feel like there's areas of dance science that are like the biggest kind of gaping holes, for lack of a better description, or the areas where we really can like probably catch up or like really fill in those gaps quite quickly if we pull from sport a little bit more than maybe we currently are?
So there's a couple like mindset areas that I see with teachers and with dancers in general. So like one thing I see when people hear dance science, they think that it's like disrespecting the art form, right? Or taking away the art from the science, right? Or like separating those two worlds. But really all we're trying to do here is just find a blend so that we can improve the dance world, what it currently is, and just take it forward. You know,
absolutely, like enhance it, not take away from it.
So it's not disrespecting, because we can still honor where the traditions came from. You know, the traditions came from through all this history, through all these years, and we can still respect and honor them. But guess what? Some of them need to be replaced, right? Like
absolutely
changed, right? So that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I agree.
So that's one place that I really, really like talking about, is like unpacking traditions, because as soon as you say dance science, people kind of will turn an eye sometimes and be like, no, you know, dance is art, dance is art, dance is art. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's like, if we can enhance the science side of things, it allows the dancers to then like be more fully artists. Because right now it's like, if they're not able to perform at their full capacity physically, or they're constantly injured or things like that, you can't express yourself in an artistic way to the best of your ability. And sometimes you can lose out on some of that artistry for like physical reasons and things like that. So if we can really embrace the science side and have that as like the foundation, then the art becomes like even more powerful and becomes like just like what it is truly meant to be, and not like, oh, well, we had to adapt this because, you know, of various like constraints that existed. So I think it's like, yeah, it's not like one or the other. And I think that like really having the science, like I always think about it as like the science side is almost like the foundation of our dancers. And then the art is like what makes it so magical on top of it. But you can't have the art unless you also have a foundation that the dancers can build upon.
Right. I mean, everything in dance science, everything in dance medicine is about honoring the dancer, honoring the dancer's health, like just health, period, end of story, just as a human. Right. So, I mean, it's like, how is that looked at? I mean, I think I can understand it from a perspective of people who really don't understand the purpose of dance science. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have, is like, why is it necessary? You know, why does it get so much resistance sometimes when people don't really know where it came from, you know?
Absolutely. And I think the more people are familiar with the concept of it and really actually what it is, I think there is more people embracing it within the dance world. And I see that like even just from like my work in social media and things like that, that more and more teachers are like, oh yeah, we want to like implement this because I see how it like helps my dancers. And so, but I don't know that they would have like thought of it or called it that previously, because they just didn't know. They're like, we want our dancers to be better, but they didn't know like the language or like truly what that field is. So I think it's improving, but like you said, I think there's still a lot of people who kind of like get their feathers ruffled about it, but maybe because they just actually don't understand what it is. Like, we're not trying to create just athletes and lose the art form. It's just that we're trying to like enhance the art form. And,
you know, like there's ways that it can be sprinkled in, right? There's ways that it can be just taught right in the dance classroom in fun ways. Doesn't have to be a lecture. I mean, it really shouldn't be a lecture for like a 7-year-old, right? It should be something fun, age appropriate, something that they can digest. But like, why can't a 7-year-old learn really basic anatomy when they're learning a plie, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think so that's like such a great segue into a lot of what you do now is like really creating resources for teachers, or like finding ways to implement anatomy or other dance science principles into your teaching. So can you tell us a little bit about like that and how that's evolved over time, and how you're implementing that?
Yep. So I sell anatomy posters right now and like printable ebooks. And to be honest, I really enjoy making them because I get to like dig into the research. But that's why I made them too, is because like I'm very aware that like a lot of dance educators don't have the time or capacity, or maybe they just don't want to sit there and read a 20-page research study, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like how realistic is that for the average dance educator? I'm not trying to disrespect, but like I feel like it's just not really realistic.
No, they don't have the time, and they probably also don't always have like the, sort of more structured academic background to even know like how to read a research paper. Like there's a lot of like skill involved in actually being able to like break down that information and consume that information. Yeah.
And I actually recently increased my prices on my ebooks because they take me so much time to even just read one research study.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And then I update them a couple times a year as like new studies come out. So again, I put them in these like digestible little like one teaching tip at a time so that people can really like digest things like one thing at a time so that it's not thrown at them like a giant paragraph. So that's one thing I'm trying to implement is like bringing the science down so that we can actually apply it. So it's not just like research sitting on a paper. Research sitting on a paper is great, but it's like, then we have to like connect the rest, so that
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I find, like, I know we both attend like the IADMS conferences and things like that. And they're so amazing because it's like so cool to have so many people in one room who are all so passionate about the same thing. But I always leave being like, cool, there's all this great research and it's never going to get applied anywhere. And I shouldn't be so pessimistic, but to me, that's always my takeaway is like, how do we get this information to the teachers or get it into the companies or the studios or whatever it is, and even just share it with other researchers in similar fields. And so I think that is a piece that's missing, although maybe a little bit better now that we're more connected through social media and the internet and stuff. There is a little bit more knowledge sharing, but that's like one of my huge takeaways is like, oh my gosh, there's so much amazing research happening, but like the vast majority of people in the dance industry aren't going to ever hear about it.
Yeah. And I feel like with conferences too, I don't feel like many dance educators attend. I feel like it's more like medical people. Yeah.
And researchers. Yeah.
Researchers, PhD students, like, faculty, professors, more along those lines. And so that's why I think like, especially Instagram is such a good like window of opportunity because I feel like a lot of studios are on there, dancers are on there, and even the older dancers are on there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Population to kind of like reach with the information that we learn from conferences, right? Which is kind of what both of us do on our social media, right? Reaching the audience in a different way.
Yeah. And in a way that's then digestible to them as well, because they don't need the whole research paper. They really know it, like the one take home that's like, hey, do you know if you implement this in your classroom, it decreases injury rates by 15% or like whatever the actual like tangible piece of information is. And then like, this is how you can implement it in your classroom. So yeah, it's amazing because I know how much work probably goes into creating like ebooks and resources and stuff like that, but they're so valuable for the dance community because those are the types of resources teachers actually will be able to utilize.
I mean, yeah, mine are honestly like mini books, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Yeah. That's awesome. And then in your own teaching practice, because obviously that's like the first place you implement all this stuff is like with your students, like in the studio. What do you find the kind of, well, first of all, like the reception to it? Like, are the students like super receptive? Are they like really interested in that sort of thing? And I feel like the answer is probably yes, because they're your students. So that's kind of my first question. But then I think my second question is like, what do you see as your dancers, especially as they like grow and kind of like, progress through the dance world? What do you see is like the advantage that they have from having learned that information, like all the way through their training over dancers who maybe like have no idea about anatomy and they just know the steps and like what they're taught from like dance vocabulary?
For me, it boils down to their anatomical awareness, right? Because like if a 7-year-old can understand a plie a little bit better using anatomy and using dance science, then that simple anatomy lesson can go a long way is another thing that I say. So like if it's taught well, even if it's just 5 minutes, if it's taught well, I think it's going to ripple through their dance education and just into their lives as humans, right? So it's like even those simple 5-minute little lessons go a long way. And what we see in our dancers is just like they're more anatomically aware, right? Sometimes they have to play catch up if they really just got the chance to learn about anatomy maybe in their teens is the hard part sometimes for dancers. I really wish it was like from their first couple dance classes that they could just start learning fun, anatomy in fun ways. And I do see some studios implementing some like really fun lessons that I've seen online. But again, I just wish it was a little bit more widespread and a little bit more consistent. But as far as like individual dancers, I mean, you will see the difference and they will feel the difference and they will tell me the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. Like I said, the tiniest things can go a long way.
Absolutely. And we see that in the clinic all the time because that's kind of, I mean, to be honest, a lot of what we do in like physical therapy is like individual anatomy lessons. So it's like really explaining like, okay, this is the injury and this is the anatomy and this is where the muscles attach and this is why we're doing this exercise and whatever. And the light bulb moments these students have where they're like, oh, is that why in class, like I should be doing this? Or they'll like all of a sudden connect it to a cue that they get from the teacher. And they're like, oh, my teacher always says this, but I've never understood what that cue meant because they don't understand or know the anatomy behind it. And so it's so like students love anatomy from like my perspective in terms of like the students coming in for physio, but they oftentimes are then having to like make those connections outside of the classroom if it's not happening in the classroom. And again, some teachers are great at implementing it in the classroom, but others not as much. And so these dancers sometimes when they come to physio might be the first time that they're like making that connection. And like all of a sudden these light bulbs go off and they're like, that makes so much sense. I had no idea that's like how the hip worked or like whatever it is.
I mean, dancers are like sponges, right?
100%.
Like you said, you tell them the one thing and it sparks all of these connections.
Yeah. And I think dancers are often like very like kinesthetic learners. And so if they understand the anatomy, it's like they can really feel it in their body where like other, general population people, maybe not as much. And so maybe anatomy is not quite as important in treatment sessions to teach some other people, although I always think anatomy is important for people to understand their own body. But dancers for sure, just like they kind of inherently understand it when you give them that information from like being able to experience it in their body.
And I mean, like I said, in my experience, they love learning about it because I'm making sure it's fun and I'm making sure it should not take up all of class. It doesn't need to take up all of class. It can just be sprinkled into the technique you're teaching them. If you're teaching them a pirouette, it can be built into the combination you're teaching them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the breakdown of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very simple.
Yeah.
Very simple.
I love that. And do you see any sort of correlation? Because I think just anecdotally, obviously, this is not backed by any research, but I think often the dancers who, especially like at higher levels and professional dancers and stuff, the dancers who understand anatomy and just the body more are more likely to be proactive about their like health and wellness. Like I think dancers come in to the clinic and sort of say, even if it's not like a true injury, but they'll be like, do you know what, there's been something going on in, I don't know, my hip flexor or whatever it is. And they like recognize that like that's the area that's a problem and it's limiting them from doing something. And they're more likely to be proactive versus a dancer who maybe doesn't understand their body. And so they just wait until it's truly an issue before they maybe are going to seek out healthcare.
Yes, especially in my experience, I work with a lot of ballet dancers. So, like the culture in ballet is to, like suck things up and
just get on with it.
Yeah, just an ankle sprain is normal here and there.
Yeah.
So in my experience, the dancers are a little more comfortable coming up to me if they have an issue like that. And at least just like letting me know, I've been feeling this in my right elbow. What do you think I should do about it? And then I can kind of give them, obviously not injury stuff, but I'll refer them out. Yeah. Or if I'm like, try this for a couple days and then come back to me the next time, yeah. Mm-hmm. So they're usually more comfortable coming up to me with like the, from the dance science lens, because they know that I view things, holistically, right? And that we can't just ignore things. If we ignore the whisper, it turns into a scream.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely anecdotally what I've seen is like the dancers seeking out care tend to be ones who maybe do have slightly more, knowledge about their bodies or have like had more exposure to some of the dance science and, those types of principles. So I'm unsurprised that that's the case.
Yeah. Or if they've already had one injury, then I think once they've had that one injury experience, I feel like after that, they like really take charge of their own health because they're like, I don't want to go through not dancing again because it's an emotional experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they often have more of the tools to deal with it as well. And so they're going to be more proactive because it doesn't feel like this like super scary, super like, oh, am I ever going to be able to dance again? They're like, okay, I know that these are the things I need to do to like take care of this injury and then get back to dancing. So it really impacts them in so many ways, like having this knowledge that, like you said, it doesn't take that long to implement in class. It can just be sprinkled in through like every age range and like all genres of dance that, you can just apply it in the classroom.
Doesn't have to be a sit down lecture. Doesn't have to cost anything. That's another barrier that I hear, the money, when they see the fitness equipment, But really, in my opinion, dance science can be taught with nothing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like really basic dance science principles. And and if we're getting into like high level, like really high performance, then that's maybe not true because there's so much more, technology and measurement and things. But it's like, really, we're starting from nothing. So anything we implement right now is going to like really move the needle so significantly that we don't need to worry about that high level stuff. And I sometimes get questions like that from dancers who are like, have heard about something on the internet or whatever. And they come in and they ask about this like really kind of like specific high level, like, should I be doing blood flow restriction training 4 times a week at 20% like capacity, like these questions. And I'm like, do you sleep for 8 hours a night? Like just like these like really, really basic things that are going to move the needle so much further. So I think the sport world has gotten a lot into some of these like high level sports science realms right now. And it's trendy. And like in dance, we're so far behind that we really still need to focus on implementing the basics. And like you said, that can be free, like the anatomy and basic, just like sleep and basic periodization and other just like really basic concepts that we can implement in dance and have a huge impact.
And, educators don't have to have like background in science necessarily, right? Like they don't have to necessarily have fitness certifications, health certifications. They don't have to be a physical therapist, right? But they can just be giving general advice and they can just be teaching, like I said, simple anatomy lessons, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
While staying in their scope.
Yeah, exactly. And staying true to like what they're actually truly good at. Like I don't teach dance anymore because I haven't taught it in so long that's like not what I'm good at anymore, but I am still really good at like analyzing movement patterns and looking at technique and correcting it from like an anatomical perspective. But like when it comes to like dance stuff, like that's not in my lane. And I think teachers can sprinkle in the dance science stuff while still like excelling at what they're really good at, which is often like the teaching side and even maybe like the more creative, the choreography and the artistic side. You can still sprinkle in base levels of like anatomy and dance science while excelling at what you're truly, truly great at.
Right. And, another thing I hear is, oh, my technique class is only 45 minutes and I only see this group once a week. Right. And so one thing that I like to say to people is think about it this way. Even the simplest, whether you're going to sprinkle it in or make like a separate anatomy lesson in their technique class, that's going to ripple into every technique step that you're teaching them anyway. So if you're teaching this group pirouettes, leaps, whatever you're teaching them, like even just throughout their current dance year, that little lesson is going to ripple anyway. So what you're doing is like, you're maximizing what they're working on anyways. So not necessarily viewing it as like a loss of, I know that, yes, technically, logically, yes, you're going to be missing a little bit of technique time, but in the long run, you're going to see it pay off.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, and I think this like kind of ties back a bit to like my fascination when I was a kid, but at the end of the day, like technique is biomechanics. And so if we don't understand the basic anatomy and biomechanics, like what else are you working on in a technique class? Because technique truly is, like, when you break it down, like, it is biomechanics. And yes, we want the dancers to keep working on that, but like, you almost can't teach technique without addressing those. And so teachers, like, they're going to make their own job easier if they go back to the basics and introduce some of that basic anatomy stuff, because then when they're describing the technique, the biomechanics of it are going to make more sense to those dancers.
Right. And so then when they hit adolescence, you've already, wiped out a lot of those common habits that we see, right? Those common, like, maybe like lower extremity habits that we see, right? So maybe you've already removed those by simply just like blending in anatomy from a young age, right? So that's already, like, you're already showing that there's going to be a ripple effect. I think it's
absolutely.
This world likes to see the fast result. They like the, they like
that instant gratification.
Yeah. They want to get those splits in a day.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, especially dancers in the more like competition world, there's sort of that expectation that, like, and maybe it's a false expectation, but this, like, dancers need to be doing like quadruple turns by the time they're 10 and like all of this stuff. And it's like, well, really, they might be able to pull that off, but it's often not with great technique. And maybe they don't have a super great foundation for those skills. Right. So we're probably better off pulling back, giving them a much more solid foundation. And maybe they don't do the quadruple until they're 13, but then it's like the cleanest quadruple you've ever seen in your life. So
again, like, you're making your job easier in the long run. Yeah. Like, you might not see it right away. They might still struggle with the technique stuff that you're teaching them. Maybe that's just like part of their learning journey. But then at some point, you're going to see it pay off. I promise. Yeah,
100%. Absolutely. I want to switch gears only slightly, but can you just tell us a little bit about, I know you're running a course through NDEO right now that's like a new course that is specifically for teachers as well. But can you just tell us a little bit about that course? Because I think it is anatomy, but is it more than just anatomy? Or tell us a bit about that course.
Yeah. So NDEO, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar who currently listen to the podcast, but they have like an online platform of courses for dance educators, dancers, all like dance people in general. And they actually already offer dance kinesiology and like movement analysis courses. So they already have those figured out. And so mine is basically very different. Mine is about like using anatomy in actual dance curriculum when we're teaching dancers. So like we're talking about today, how do we improve how we teach a pirouette, for example? Just throwing that out there, right? Yeah.
Right. So it's like a lot more kind of like almost like applied anatomy. Like
applying. Yeah. So it's called Using Dance Science to Enhance Curriculum. Yeah.
Cool.
And I've been getting amazing feedback from the students. It's over full right now.
Nice.
Over capacity. But I'm having fun grading. Every student is amazing and is very kind, and they all learn so much from each other, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful environment. The one thing I've noticed is everyone comes from different backgrounds with anatomy.
Okay, interesting.
That's the one challenge is like we'll have one person who's like, oh, I teach anatomy through this course already. And so I already have a strong background. And then there's other people who are like, I'm taking this course because I didn't grow up with anatomy and I want to take on the responsibility.
Right. And so it's...
Yeah, I'm trying to gear the assignments into like in their own teaching environment and improving their own teaching environment, and not necessarily me just giving them an assignment to do, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So that they can like see how it fits in and the value in their own kind of environment. That course sounds amazing.
Thank you.
And is it, because I know you're like finishing up or in the middle of a cohort right now, but is it running again in 2024, or do you not know yet? Or...
I was actually asking NDEO if they would be happy to run it again in the fall. I haven't received a yes or a no yet, but otherwise it'll be running again next year.
Okay, cool. Awesome. We'll link that in the show notes. Like I'll like link to the NDEO website, because they do, like you said, have great courses, like not just your course, but just like, yeah exactly. So it's... Yeah. Such a great resource for dance teachers out there that some people may not know about. I don't know if it's as prevalent in Canada. Like, I'm not sure if teachers are as aware of it as they are maybe in the US. So I will definitely link that in the show notes in through there. I have one more question for you that just popped into my head, and then we'll sort of start to wrap things up because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I noticed, because I also offer like courses for dance teachers and sort of similar, like applying dance science principles and sort of various courses. But I often find in my courses that the people who are taking them are I always sort of say like preaching to the converted. Like the people who are taking them are the people who are already like quite knowledgeable, which I love because we can really get into like the nitty gritty and like really dive into detail about things. But I always just feel like there's this like massive amount of teachers out there who aren't accessing these resources. And I think mostly because they don't know they exist. I don't think it's like teachers who are like, oh, I know this exists, but I don't see value in it. I think like I often get teachers who will like hear about something or register and be like, how did I not know this was like a thing previously? And I'm curious if that's like your experience as well, like with the work you do with dance teachers.
And I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but in my opinion, it's a lot of ego when, they kind of have, I call it like if their door is fully open or fully closed, right?
Yeah.
Some of them just are like resistant to information in general. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. There's that. Yeah, sort of group of teachers. And I mean, realistically, we may never reach those teachers. There's always going to be a subset of people who are just like never open. But I always feel like there's this like subset of teachers who are open and like just have never been connected to the resources. And part of that is, I think, and I harp on this a lot on the podcast and on my social media, but like the lack of any sort of like regulation or standardization within the dance industry. It makes it hard to disseminate that information. But yeah, it's just something that I've like noticed and wondered if you have this similar experience, and it sounds like you do.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's like we don't have to get certified in anything technically. I mean, we could just open a studio, you could just start teaching, and this the scary part, right? Yeah,
totally.
I have a lot of students in my class actually who just told me this is their first NDEO course, and like I said, some of them are just totally just brand new to dance science. They're like, I just want to learn anatomy. I just like, I didn't grow up with it. So I have to take the responsibility and teach it to my kids. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this
is amazing.
Like, I am so happy you're here.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I definitely hear more of that as well, where like teachers, where it's kind of like their sort of first foray into things. So I do think that things are starting to change and things are starting to evolve within the dance industry. And I do think like social media and just the internet and being connected is one of the like driving forces behind that, which I think is awesome. But there is still that element of, lots of the teachers who take my courses are teachers who've been teaching for like 40 years and have every certification under the sun. And they're like, oh, I just like learning. So I'm here again. And I'm like, all right, great. And I like love it. But also I'm like, what about bringing all the new teachers from your studio as well? Or, like just trying to figure out ways to like get the information out to the most amount of teachers possible.
Yeah. There's, like you said, there is a subset that's out there, and they're probably
100%.
Feeling maybe stressed or overwhelmed. So yeah, like not, or maybe just not on social media as much.
Yeah, potentially for sure. And I think, like you said, I think those teachers being able to implement like, some more anatomy into their classes and things like that could like help their teaching so much. Like it would be such a great service to them for them to have those resources. And so, yeah, it's just like continually trying to figure out like, how do we reach more and more and more of these teachers? So it's an ongoing process.
I know it's also like the Facebook groups, like the new Dance Teacher Network. I'm not sure part of those. Yeah. But those have a lot of members in them. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. And I often like people will kind of like, ask questions about like, how do I like find out more resources about this? Or they'll even ask just like anatomy questions and stuff. And I do try and like chime in and be like, okay, like how can we connect you with these resources? Or here, like a lot of teachers have not heard of organizations like IADMS or NDEO or things like that. So it's like, there's these organizations doing like really great work out there. So yeah.
I think that's the other thing too with dance science is it really depends on people's geographical location too.
Yes.
people can, live in a different place and have a very different, maybe a stronger experience with dance science, and then people barely know about it, right?
100%.
Stayed over.
Yeah. And we see that a lot too, just with like dance physio or like dance healthcare in general. Like I feel like in certain cities, it's like become the norm that dancers know that there's like specialized healthcare for dancers, and they're going to seek out like a dance medicine clinic and all of that. And like sometimes I forget that that's like not the norm pretty much everywhere in the world at all. And so we're very, lucky in places that does exist. But a lot of people are like, reaching out to me and being like, okay, like I live in a place where there's only, practitioners who don't know anything about dance. What do I do? And so it's great that we have like virtual resources now. We can do telehealth appointments, but also sometimes dancers don't even have access to that. So definitely geography makes a big difference for teachers, I think, as well, in terms of their ability to access resources.
Yeah. So, I mean, at least we have the internet at this point to make those things where things are like less accessible for people. Because trust me, I know that there's areas where it's less accessible, and I wish that weren't the case. I wish every dancer was receiving the same amount.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, like I said, I don't want to take up too much of your time today, but I always end my guest episodes with 5 kind of rapid-ish fire questions that are sort of fun. If you are willing to play along with those, I am just going to pull those up. So first question, and you don't have to answer them in one word, and they don't have to be like super rapid fire. But first question, what is your favorite genre or style of dance? And you can tell us why if you want, or...
Oh, that's easy. Ballet. With the structure, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the routine and the structure, yeah. Would you rather be on a stage or in the studio?
Studio, for sure.
Okay.
Getting to practice,
Yeah. If you could share the stage, share the studio with any dancer, past or present, who would it be and why?
Oh, Misty Copeland. I'm a big fan of Misty Copeland.
Nice.
Yes.
That's, great shout there. What's one thing that you would go back and tell your younger self as a dancer?
You don't have to be perfect. Yeah.
Great advice. And finally, last rapid fire, if there was one thing that you could change about the dance world as it is right now, what would it be?
Oh, simple anatomy lessons being taught from a young age. Can go a long way.
Yeah. Love it. Amazing. For people who want to be able to connect with you or access your resources and reach out, what are the best ways for people to find you?
So I'm most active on my Instagram page.
Okay.
It's the.dance scientist. And then from there, if you just click my link in my bio, it will take you to all of my other links.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. And we will also link that in the show notes so people can click right from there, and we'll link your Instagram bio. So the Dance Scientist on Instagram, if you want to get a hold of Maria. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I feel like we could talk forever about like all the nerdy dance science things. And I always love having conversations like this with people in the field. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Before I sign off, is there any last thing you want to leave the audience with? Anything you missed out on or really want to talk about?
Well, I love today's conversation. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.